He was the man who left her without a word. She was the girl who never wanted to see him again until she returned with a 4-year-old child. And the child had his eyes. What happens when a powerful man is forced to face the consequences of a moment he thought he left in the past? This isn't just a love story. It's a story of survival, betrayal, and the strength to come back not broken, but stronger. The sky over Boston was washed in pale gold, and rain the kind that falls silently but leaves everything soaked in memory. Isla Bennett stood at the threshold of a building she never imagined returning to. Not like this, not holding a small child in her arms. Not for years later. The concierge didn't recognize her. Why would he? She didn't belong here. Not among polished floors and mirrored elevators. Not in heels that hurt and a dress too thin for the weather. And certainly not with a little boy asleep on her shoulder, breathing softly against her collarbone. But she asked for him anyway. Mr. Damien Cross, top floor. Please tell him it's Isla. The man at the desk hesitated. His eyes scanned her, taking in the soaked hair, the weary expression, the child. Then, surprisingly, he made a call without questions. She didn't expect Damien to answer. She didn't even expect him to remember her name. But within minutes, the doors opened and she was escorted inside, her heart pounding with each step closer to the past. 4 years earlier, she was just 19, a scholarship student at a small college downtown, working nights as a server at elite business galas she couldn't even dream of affording. He was 30, powerful and dangerous in all the ways a man could be without ever touching a weapon. Damien Cross, CEO of Crosstech Ventures, eyes like winter storms, words like fire. A man born in glass towers and boardrooms. Their paths should have never crossed, but they did. That night, she spilled wine on a tablecloth and apologized to many times. He watched her from across the room, quiet and still. And when a drunken executive cornered her in the hallway, it was Damien who stepped in. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply said, "Is that how you speak to women?" The man disappeared within seconds. Damien looked at her then, not like a billionaire. Not like a stranger. He looked at her like he'd seen her before in another life before, walls and titles and masks. And that was the beginning. She didn't mean to fall for him, not really. But he kept showing up, bringing coffee to her dorm, listening to her talk about her mother's illness, showing her a world she thought only existed in dreams. And then, one night changed everything. He took her innocence like it was something fragile and sacred, whispered promises that felt like safety. Held her like the world had narrowed down to 2 people. No games, no pressure, just warmth, honesty. But when she woke up the next morning, he was gone. Not a note, not a message, nothing. She called once, then twice. No response. The number disconnected a week. Later, she waited and waited until she finally accepted that he wasn't coming back. Until 2 months later, when the test came back positive, she wanted to scream, to cry, to find him and ask why. But instead, she dropped out of school, worked double shifts, and buried her pride. She raised her son Luca alone. He had Damien's eyes, his smirk, his impossible focus, but he had her heart, her resilience, her light, and for almost 5 years that was enough. Until Luca started asking, "Where's my dad?" Until she saw his drawings always of a man in the background, always faceless. Until she realized she couldn't keep hiding the truth forever. Now she stood in front of Damien Cross's penthouse door, feeling like she was about to collapse. The door opened there he was. Damien. Unchanged in all the ways that mattered. Still tall, still intimidating, still the man who walked away from her like she was just a mistake. His jaw tightened when he saw her. Then his gaze dropped and locked on the boy beside her. Luca stared back at him with those unmistakable steel-gray eyes. Neither spoke. The air was heavy with everything that had been left unsaid. And finally, Isla broke the silence. "His name is Luca. He's 4, and he's yours." Damien's expression didn't change, but his hand gripped the doorframe like the world had tilted. "I don't want anything from you," she added quickly. I thought he deserved to know where he came from." He stared at Luca again. Luca blinked and stepped closer, holding up a tiny model spaceship. "You like spaceships?" Damien asked softly, the first crack in his voice showing. Luca nodded. And just like that, a thread connected them, not with drama, not with anger, but with the quiet weight of truth. "Come in," Damien said at last. "Please." Isla hesitated, heart pounding. And then, slowly, she stepped into the place she had once only dreamed of. Not for herself, but for her son. He had never felt fear quite like this. Damien Cross had been in million-dollar negotiations. He had made decisions that shifted entire industries, spoken in boardrooms filled with men twice his age and twice as hungry. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared him for the sight of the little boy who looked like him. Luca, whose son, the name echoed in his head long after Isla stepped inside, brushing past him gently, not with anger, but the kind of dignity only life could teach. She hadn't come to beg. She hadn't even come to argue. She had simply brought the truth and placed it at his feet like a mirror he had no choice but to look into. The boy didn't speak much. He explored the edges of Damien's polished living room with wide, curious eyes, occasionally glancing up at him, as if studying a stranger he was trying to remember. Damien couldn't breathe right. Isla stood still, her hands wrapped tightly in front of her, as if she were holding herself together by threads. Her coat dripped quietly onto the hardwood floor, forgotten. Her eyes scanned the room, once perhaps remembering how this world once seemed unreachable. "I didn't come to disrupt anything," she said, her voice low. "I didn't even plan to come here at all, until Luca asked if he had a father. He asked why he never saw him, and I realized I couldn't lie anymore." He listened. Every word she spoke cut deeper than any boardroom betrayal ever had. "I didn't know," he murmured at last. "Isla, I didn't know you were pregnant." Her lips pressed into a tight line. "You didn't ask." She wasn't wrong. Memory returned without mercy of that night, when he had kissed her like she was the only honest thing in a dishonest world, and then left before the sun rose. It wasn't because she meant nothing. It was because she had meant too much. Because he had seen the future in her eyes, and it scared him. Because he was a coward. He tried to explain. "I thought, if I walked away early, I'd spare you the disappointment. I wasn't ready for anything real. I hadn't been real in years. And you think I was?" Her voice didn't rise. "Do you think I was ready to become a mother at 19? Do you know what it felt like to take the test in a shared bathroom stall at the community center, and realize you were never coming back?" He looked away, shame closing in around his chest like a noose. "I never wanted anything from you," she added. "I still don't. But Luca, he deserves more than silence." Damien looked back at the boy, who was now lining up little toy cars across the coffee table. His tiny hands were methodical, his eyes focused. The resemblance was terrifying. "I want to know him," Damien whispered, more to himself than to her. "I want to try." She hesitated. For the first time, he saw the flicker of fear in her, not for herself, but for her son. "You can't come and go," she said. "You don't get to show up, feel guilty, and disappear again." "I won't," he said, without hesitation this time. "I swear, Isla, I won't walk away again." She nodded slowly, but trust wasn't a switch. It would take time, if it ever came back at all. Later that evening, when the rain had softened to mist and the sky turned a dull silver, Damien watched Isla and Luca from the kitchen. She was helping the boy take off his little shoes, wiping the mud from the soles with the kind of quiet grace he remembered. He wondered how many nights she had cried without anyone to hear, how many birthdays she had planned alone, how many scraped knees she had kissed better while the world went on, unaware of the life he had left behind. He wondered how he could ever make it right. Luca looked up suddenly. "Are you my daddy?" Damien froze. Isla didn't answer. She looked at Damien instead. The silence between them was heavier than before. Damien knelt slowly, meeting the boy's gaze. "Yes," he said gently, "I am." Luca didn't cry or smile. He simply nodded once, as if he already knew. Then he held out a small, worn book. "Will you read to me?" Damien took it with shaking hands. That night, he read aloud while Isla sat in the corner, quiet but watchful, like a mother guarding a fragile bridge being rebuilt one word at a time. Long after Luca fell asleep, curled on the sofa, Damien closed the book and looked at Isla. "Why didn't you come sooner?" "I was waiting to forget you," she whispered. "But Luca reminded me that forgetting you meant erasing part of him, and I couldn't do that, not to him." He nodded. There were no more words left to say, just the sound of the rain, softer now, and the weight of everything they had lost. And for the first time in years, Damien Cross didn't feel powerful. He felt human. She rose to leave, gently lifting Luca into her arms. "Will you come see him again?" she asked quietly. He stood frozen, heart thudding. Tomorrow, and every day after that, if you'll let me. She gave a tired nod, pulled the coat tighter around her son, and stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, Damien stood alone again, but this time, the silence didn't comfort him, it haunted him. Most people never get the chance to fix their greatest mistake. Damien didn't just get the chance, he got a second life delivered to his doorstep. And that made every step forward feel like walking on glass. The next morning, he was at his apartment before the sun had fully risen. Not with flowers or expensive gifts, he knew those wouldn't mean anything now. He came with something rarer, a notebook filled with questions he wanted to ask Luca, and a quiet promise in his chest. He didn't yet know how to speak. Isla answered the door with surprise in her eyes, but not resistance. Her hair was up, she wore no makeup, and the apartment smelled faintly of oatmeal and lavender. It was small, clean, worn with life. Toys lined the corners, books stacked unevenly on low shelves. It was a home not fancy, not flawless, but filled with something Damien's penthouse had never known. Warmth. Luca ran to the door with a crayon in one hand and mismatched socks. You came back, he said. I said I would. Luca grinned and tugged his hand. Come see my spaceship. The boy didn't hesitate to let him in, but Damien felt the hesitation from Isla, not in her words, but in the way she watched him, closely, carefully, like she was trying to decide if she was making a mistake by letting him in again. He didn't blame her. He didn't trust himself either. Still, he sat on the floor with Luca and spent the next hour listening to the boy explain planets, stars, and why Pluto should still count as one. Damien wrote every word down in his notebook. Isla didn't say much. She watched from the kitchen, arms crossed, but there was something softer in her eyes this time. Not forgiveness, but the space where it might grow. Around mid-morning, Luca grabbed his coat and declared it was park day. Isla hesitated, but Damien stood first. I'll carry his bike, if that's okay. She gave a small nod. Outside, the world was thawing from winter. Children shouted in the distance, chasing each other through puddles. The park was crowded, but Luca found his corner, a quiet strip of grass near the sandpit, set up base camp with his toys. Isla sat on a bench. Damien sat beside her. The silence was less sharp now, but still loaded. You've done a good job, he said at last. With him, he's kind and brilliant. She smiled, but it was a tired smile. He's everything I hoped he'd be, and nothing like the man I thought I'd raise him with. He looked down. The guilt hadn't faded. It had only settled deeper. I had no excuse, only fear. You had power, she said, and you used it to disappear. He swallowed hard. I don't want to disappear again. She nodded slowly. Then don't. It wasn't an invitation, it was a challenge. He looked out at Luca, who was now building a launch pad out of sticks and string. Damien had missed so much. The first laugh, the first steps, the first time he said mama. All of it gone, like pages torn out of a book he was only just beginning to read. Do you want to know something? Isla said suddenly. He doesn't call you Dad, not yet. I haven't taught him to. I wasn't sure if you were someone worth calling that. Damien didn't flinch. Let me earn it. The wind blew lightly between them. Isla looked away. He asks a lot of questions at night, about where people go, about why some kids have two parents and he only has one. I always told him he was never missing anything. And did he believe you? She looked at her son. He tried. The pain in her voice made something break in Damien. Not loudly, not obviously, but deep, like a ship quietly cracking under pressure. He didn't touch her, didn't try to reach for her hand. That wasn't his place. Not yet. Instead, he stood up, walked toward Luca, and helped him tie the sticks tighter. That afternoon, they walked home as the clouds rolled in. Luca skipped ahead, singing something about space missions and marshmallows. Damien turned to Isla once more. Can I pick him up tomorrow from school? She paused. You even know where his school is? He pulled out his notebook again. You told me. I wrote it down. Something about that made her stop. He wasn't here to play hero. He wasn't here with apologies wrapped in money. He was showing up, and maybe, just maybe, that mattered more. That night, after Luca went to bed, Isla stood alone in the hallway staring at the quiet door. It felt like something had shifted. Not trust, not love, but possibility. She didn't want to let it happen, not again. But part of her, small and stubborn, wondered what it would be like if he meant it this time. What if people could change? What if the man who had once vanished Was the same man now willing to fight for what he lost? And what if the child sleeping in the next room would grow up, never having to wonder again where he came from? She didn't have the answers. But tomorrow was another day, and Damien had promised he'd be there. Some people show up when it's easy, some only when it's convenient. But the ones who truly care show up when it's hard, when no one's watching, and everything is falling apart. It had been 3 weeks since Damien became a part of Luca's life. Quietly, consistently, not as a guest, not as a savior, but as a man trying to earn a place he once abandoned. He had started doing school drop-offs in the morning and learned that Luca always asked for 2 goodbye hugs, one fast, one tight. He learned that Luca liked apples with peanut butter, and that he panicked if he didn't have his blue socks on Fridays. He also learned that being a father meant showing up in ways that never made headlines, but life had a cruel sense of timing. It was the second Wednesday in March when everything changed. The morning started normally. Luca had cereal, told Damien, a joke he barely understood, and kissed his mom on the cheek before skipping off toward his classroom. Damien stood beside Isla on the sidewalk, coffee in hand, watching their son disappear into the building like a small rocket of light. "Thank you," Isla said softly, "for being here." He turned to her, surprised. "You don't have to thank me." "I know," she replied, "but I want to." It was the first time in 4 years she had said anything like that. He had no idea those words would be the last thing he'd hear from her for the next 6 hours. By noon, Isla wasn't answering her phone, not texts, not calls, not even messages from her sister, who Damien eventually reached out to after the 3rd hour of silence. She said she wasn't feeling well this morning, her sister told him, but I didn't think it was serious. By late afternoon, he was pacing outside Luca's school, his hands cold and shaking. When the teacher walked Luca out and smiled politely, Damien forced a calm he didn't feel. "Hey buddy, we're going to do something a little different today. Okay, just you and me. Mummy's not feeling great." Luca nodded, but his face tightened. He always knew more than he let on. Damien brought him back to the penthouse, something he hadn't done since the first meeting. He made him hot chocolate, told stories about when he was little, and watched as Luca colored silently in the corner. But the boy kept glancing at the door like he was waiting for someone. That night, Isla still hadn't called. Damien's instincts kicked in hard. He called every hospital in the city. When one finally confirmed her name, his blood ran cold. Isla had collapsed in a grocery store parking lot from exhaustion and dehydration. A stranger had called an ambulance. No ID, no emergency contact. She had been in and out of consciousness, but they'd admitted her. When Damien reached the hospital, she was asleep, pale, still. His chest felt like it was caving in. He sat beside her in the silence, the hum of machines and the quiet beep of monitors, the only sound. He held her hand, careful not to wake her. Her fingers were colder than he remembered, and thinner. The nurse entered softly and gave him a small nod. "She's stable now, but she's been burning the candle at both ends for too long." Single mums, they don't rest. He knew. She had never rested, not since the day he left. He watched her sleep for nearly 2 hours. He thought of all the times she must have cried quietly so Luca wouldn't hear. All the moments she carried the world on her back without anyone noticing. He had admired her strength before. Now he realized it was more than strength. It was sacrifice. When she woke up and saw him beside her, she blinked slowly, as if unsure whether it was a dream. "Luca," she croaked. "He's safe. With me, sleeping." Her body relaxed. A single tear slid down the side of her face, but she didn't wipe it. "I didn't want you to see me like this." He shook his head. "This is exactly when I should see you. When it's not perfect, when it's real." She closed her eyes. "I didn't tell anyone how tired I was. I thought if I admitted it, it would break me." "You held everything together alone for 4 years, he said gently. "You can let someone hold you now." She didn't respond, but her hand squeezed his. The next day, he brought Luca to visit. The boy ran to her bed, clutching a picture. He drew of all 3 of them standing under a crooked rainbow. "I missed you, Mummy," he whispered. "I missed you more," she said, pulling him close. Damien stood in the doorway, watching them. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His presence said everything. That night, after Luca fell asleep in a chair beside the hospital bed, Isla looked up at Damien. "You didn't run this time." "I won't," he said, "even if I push you away again." Even then, a long silence passed between them. "You know," she said quietly. The last time I was this vulnerable was the night I told you I loved you, and the next morning you were gone. He didn't look away. And this time, I'll be here every morning, until you believe it. A tear slid down her cheek, but this one felt different. Not from sadness, not from the slow, impossible beginning of hope. Asterisk. Some wounds don't bleed on the outside. They sit buried silent, invisible, waiting for the right moment to be seen, to be touched, to be understood. The first time Isla laughed again, really laughed, it caught even her by surprise. It was a week after the hospital. She was still recovering, still moving slower than usual, but Damien had insisted on taking over anything that involved lifting, driving, or planning. For once, she didn't argue. She simply let go, just a little. That afternoon, while Luca was building a pillow fort in the living room, Damien tried to cook dinner. He burned the rice, then he added salt instead of sugar into the applesauce. When he opened the fridge to grab the milk, the entire carton spilled onto his shirt and the floor, with the kind of drama only kitchens seemed to produce. Isla stood in the hallway, watching him silently struggle, shirt-soaked, hair disheveled, muttering to himself, and something in her cracked open, not with pity, with laughter, a soft, breathy, surprised laugh that filled the small space like sunlight. It was so unexpected, so alive, that Damien paused mid-mop and turned to her in shock. "You think this is funny?" She grinned, wiping tears from her eyes. "You look like someone attacked you with a dairy truck." He chuckled too. "I've run billion-dollar deals and somehow can't figure out how to boil rice. Unbelievable." She stepped closer. "It's not the rice. It's the fact that you're trying." He met her gaze then, and for a moment, the room fell quiet. Everything between them, the ache, the silence, the years of distance, was still there, but something new had been layered on top of it. Recognition, not just of the past, but of who they were now. Later that night, Luca fell asleep curled between them on the couch, worn out from laughter and stories. Isla carefully tucked a blanket over him and turned to Damien, who was still holding one of the picture books upside down. "I never thought I'd see this," she whispered. "The three of us, in one room, peaceful." "Neither did I," he said, "but now that I do, I can't imagine being anywhere else." She sat back, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. "You know what I feared most when I found out I was pregnant?" He shook his head. "Not the money, not the sleepless nights. I was scared I'd become bitter, that I'd spend my life resenting you, and that it would spill over onto him." He looked at her gently. "Did you know?" she said, smiling, faintly, but only because he was too pure, too joyful. Every time I felt anger, he'd smile or say something like, "Mummy, your heart is made of stars," and I'd forget the pain. I lived for him. Damien swallowed the lump rising in his throat. "I wish I could take it back, the way I left, the silence." "You can't," she replied, "but you can choose what you do now." And he did. He started showing up to meetings. He volunteered at Luca's class on Fridays to read space books. He built an actual spaceship-themed bed from scratch, badly, but with love. He introduced Luca to the telescope on his penthouse balcony, and together they spent nights naming imaginary constellations. He never tried to buy their affection. He didn't bring gifts or throw money at problems. He just stayed present, steady, listening. But forgiveness wasn't a single moment. It was a process. And one night, that process hit its sharpest edge. They were sitting at the dinner table. Luca had been unusually quiet. He was drawing something in his sketchbook, pressing the pencil hard, over and over. Damien noticed first. "Hey buddy, everything okay?" Luca didn't answer. Isla leaned in. "What is it?" Luca's lips quivered. "Today at school, someone said my daddy didn't want me, that he left." The silence was instant, sharp. Damien's face went pale. Isla's hand slowly reached across the table to touch Luca's. "Sweetheart, listen to me," she began. But Luca stood, gripping his drawing. "Is that true?" Damien rose, to his voice soft but steady. "Can I tell you something, Luca?" The boy nodded. "Barely. I didn't know you existed until a few weeks ago, and when I found out, I couldn't believe I had missed so much. I didn't leave you, Luca. I left because I was scared, and that was wrong. But I want you to know this: if I could go back and choose again, I'd choose you, every single time." Luca looked at him for a long moment, then walked across the room and handed him the sketchbook. Inside was a drawing. It was of their family, Damien, Isla, and Luca standing in the middle, with stars drawn all around him, above them, written in a child's hand. We found each other again. Damien knelt, tears pressing at the corners of his eyes. We did, buddy. We really did. That night, after Luca fell asleep, Isla stood in the doorway of Damien's room. I heard what you said. To him, I meant every word. She nodded. He believes you now, and you. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked up to him and placed her hand over his chest. I'm trying, she whispered, and maybe that's enough for tonight. He didn't move. He didn't pull her closer. He just let her be. Because sometimes, the most powerful kind of love is the one that waits, that listens, that stays. Some stories don't end when the pain stops. They end when love chooses to just once, but every single day, even when it's hard, even when it's uncertain. The first time Isla realized she wasn't scared anymore was during a thunderstorm. It was the kind of storm that used to wake her in the middle of the night, crashing like the world was trying to shake her apart. She'd always been alone during those nights, holding a sleeping Luca close while pretending she wasn't falling apart inside. But this time, she wasn't alone. The wind howled against the window panes and rain struck the glass like pebbles. From the sky, Luca, now 5, had crawled into bed between them just after midnight, his small hands clinging to her arm. She expected him to whisper the usual, "Make it go away, Mummy." But he didn't. Instead, he whispered, "Daddy's here too, so I'm not scared." She looked across the pillows and saw Damien already awake, gently brushing the boy's hair with quiet focus. He looked back at her not as a man who had once broken her, but as a man who had spent every day since trying to piece her world back together. And he was doing it, not with grand gestures, but with constancy, with little moments that stacked like bricks, slowly building something strong enough to hold them all. When the morning came, the storm had passed, but something in her had shifted permanently. She no longer saw him as the man who left. She saw him as the man who came back and never left again. Weeks later, something happened that neither of them expected. It was a Sunday morning when Damien asked if he could take Isla and Luca somewhere special. He didn't say where, only that it was quiet and beautiful, and that he wanted to share it with them. They drove out of the city, windows down, music low, the scent of spring blooming across the hillsides. Isla was quiet at first, unsure of what this was, but not anxious. Trust had returned to her in pieces, and by now, it was nearly whole. They arrived at a large open field just outside a tiny town she didn't know by name. A few trees, a narrow path, and in the distance a small cottage. Damien stepped out and looked at her. "I bought this place 2 years ago," he said. Didn't know why at the time, just knew it felt peaceful, safe. Luca ran through the tall grass with the kind of freedom only children know. Isla stepped onto the porch, staring at the faded blue door, the ivy crawling up the side. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's for you," Damien said. "For both of you." She turned, stunned. "Damien, I'm not asking for anything in return," he interrupted gently. "You don't owe me love. You don't owe me a title. I just want you to know that whether or not we ever become more than what we are right now, you'll never be alone again." Her eyes welled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she walked to him and placed her hand on his chest, right where his heartbeat pulsed beneath his shirt. "You already are more," she said quietly. "You became more the day you chose to stay through the hardest parts." Luca came bounding back, waving wildflowers and laughing. "Can we live here, Mommy? Can we stay forever?" She smiled and looked at Damien. "Forever sounds nice," she said. They didn't move in that day. They didn't rush it. But over the next few months, they built a rhythm that looked a lot like home. Sunday breakfasts on the porch, stargazing nights with Luca naming every constellation, quiet mornings with coffee and conversation, hard days, too, because real love doesn't avoid the hard parts, it walks through them. And one summer evening, while Luca was asleep on the porch swing, Damien reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. It wasn't a ring, it was a folded piece of paper, a drawing one of Luca's, the three of them standing beneath a rainbow. But this time, Damien had added one more word at the top: family. He didn't say much, he didn't need to, he just handed her the paper and whispered, "I finally believe I deserve this, not because I'm perfect, but because I fought for it." She looked at the paper, then at the man she once never thought she'd forgive, then at the child they both loved with everything they had, and she knew, some people break you, but others help you build something stronger than what was lost. He had broken her once, but now, day by day, he was teaching her how to live again with hope, with faith, with love that was steady, quiet, and real, not the kind that shouts, the kind that stays.